Hello and welcome to this Disney knitting tutorial. This is part one of a two-part tutorial series in which we'll be making the Nemo portrait square. In this section of the tutorial we'll be working on the background square, which is knit in this lovely seed stitch pattern, and we'll be making the parts up for the eyes, and we'll be joining it all together and turning it into the portrait in part two. So I hope you'll enjoy this tutorial. What you will need for the Nemo portrait square: you're going to need your blaze yarn, which is this lovely fiery orange, midnight, which is black, and a white yarn. We're going to need our 4mm knitting needles, a pair of scissors just for trimming those ends, and a darning needle with a big eye so we can sew it together. We're going to start with our background square, and we're going to cast on with our blaze yarn, this lovely fiery orange. We need a long tail and we need to make a slip knot. Pop that on a needle and cast on 30 stitches. That is 30 stitches there. Just going to trim my end, it's a bit too long. The background on the square is worked in seed stitch, which is an alternating rib stitch. When you knit a normal rib, which is knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, you end up with vertical lines of knit stitches and purl stitches, which concertina in and give you the cuffs that you get on like sweatshirts and things like that. If you alternate where your knits and purls go, you end up with a really lovely textured design, and that's what we're going for this time. So we are going to be starting off as you would start any rib row, which is knit a stitch and purl a stitch. So you're going to knit your first stitch. You're then going to bring your yarn round and purl your next stitch. Take your yarn to the back again and knit the next stitch. Bring the yarn round, purl the next stitch. And we're going to continue doing this to the end of the row. So you get that rocking motion of bringing the yarn to the back and the front after every stitch. Knit, purl. Just keep doing that to the end of the row. We started on a knit, so we're going to end on a purl because we've got an even number of stitches. And that is our first row done. Row 2 is exactly the same. So we knit the first stitch and then we're going to purl the second stitch. Knit, purl. Knit, purl, knit, purl. Just keep doing that to the end of the row. It's not a very easy stitch to keep in frame because you're moving about all the time, swinging your yarn from the front to the back. A lot of people don't particularly like doing a rib stitch, but I absolutely love it. I find the swinging of the yarn to the front and back very therapeutic. And we're ending on a purl stitch again. Can you see how that's starting to form a rib texture? You've got your knits and your purls. Knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. On the next row, row 3, we're going to change things up slightly. So we're going to start with the purl stitch and then continue doing knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 to the end. And what this does is it shifts our columns of knit stitches and purl stitches along one. And this is where we start to get the texture. I'll show you what I mean. So row 3, and we're going to start with a purl stitch this time. And we're just going to do the same stitch, knit 1, purl 1 to the end. We're starting with a purl. That's the only difference. And we started on a purl stitch, so we're going to be ending on a knit stitch. And that's our row 3. Purl 1, knit 1 to the end. Row 4 is exactly the same, so we're going to start on a purl stitch again. And then knit 1. Purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 all the way to the end. And ending on a knit stitch. So that is our 4 rows, and that is what makes up our pattern. So the first 2 rows are knit 1, purl 1, starting with a knit stitch, and the second 2 rows are purl 1, knit 1, starting with a purl stitch. And if you just have a look at that texture, you can see how our column of knit stitches that would have continued up has now shifted over here. So these are our knit stitches that are shifting over, and they're going to continue to do that as we continue in the pattern. So in total we need to repeat this pattern 12 times, but I'm just going to do it once more and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. I have just repeated another 4 rows there, so I've just done another full pattern repeat, and you can really start seeing those columns of knit stitches moving over now, and you get this lovely diagonal pattern. It's really textured as well. Such a lovely stitch pattern is this. So all you're going to do is continue repeating this stitch pattern, and the pattern says to do it a total of 12 times. And so it is quite important to be able to read your knitting, to be able to count, or you could use a row counter. You can get little clicky row counters, but just so you can read it, you're going to have one of these knit columns per pattern repeat. So it doesn't matter where you start as long as you don't go off on the diagonal, but go up. You can count 1, 2. So I know I've done 2 pattern repeats. But at the end of the day, we are making a square, so as long as your finished length is the same as your width, I think you're fine. And I'll see you when we get there. Here we have our background square. I've done 48 rows of pattern, and now it's just time to cast off. We are going to cast off in pattern, so it's very similar to cast offs you've done before, but we're going to use our pattern, so our knit 1, purl 1. So we're going to knit the first stitch, purl the next stitch, and then pass our first stitch over. Knit the next stitch, pass that over, purl the next stitch, purl, and just keep doing that to the end of the cast off row. last stitch, open up that loop, trim our end and pass it through. And here is our finished background square. You can see that lovely textural pattern throughout. It does look a bit not square. That is just the nature of this seed stitch pattern, because it has a diagonal design to it. It has a tendency to have a sort of natural bias to it, so it tends to sort of lean to one side. That will be completely not noticeable when it is joined into the blanket. When it's joined at each side, it'll fit squarely in there. So we're just going to put this to one side now, and we're going to get on with making the parts for the eyes. So we'll be starting off with the white parts, and we'll do that next. We are now going to move on to making Nemo's eyes, and for this we need our white yarn and our midnight yarn. We're going to be starting off with the white. And we're going to cast on 4 stitches. Row 1, we're going to knit front and back into each stitch. So knit into the front of the stitch, then take the needle round and knit into the back of the stitch. And you're going to do that in every stitch. So knit into the front, take the needle round to the back and knit into the back of the stitch. Knit into the front and the back. And so we've doubled our stitches and we now have 8 stitches. Row 2, we're going to purl. Row 3, and we're going to increase at each side. So we're going to knit front and back in the first stitch and the last stitch and just knit all the stitches in the middle. So knit front and back, knit 6, and knit front and back in that last stitch. Row 4, we're going to purl again. All our wrong side rows during this eye are purl. Okay, so that's the first of our 2 increase rows, and we're just going to be repeating that another 2 times. So for the next row, we're knitting front and back in our first stitch, knit all the way along, and then knit front and back in our last stitch. Then we're going to purl a row, and we're going to do that again. So knit front and back in the first stitch, knit all the stitches and knit front and back in the last stitch. Finally, purl a row, and that's our increases. So I'll meet you back when we've done that. That is our increases done, and I've also done row 8, which is a purl row, just to bring me back here to the front to show you. Next, we've got 4 more rows of stocking stitch, so really simple. We're just going to knit all the stitches on the next row, purl all the stitches on the next row after that, knit all the stitches, and then purl all the stitches. So 4 rows, plain old stockinette stitch. That is row 8 to 12 finished, just worked plain in stockinette stitch, and now we're going to start decreasing to make this into the sort of circular eye shape. So we've got these increases at the bottom, and we're going to mirror that with the decreases at the top. So the first thing we're going to do on our knit row is we are going to slip, slip, knit. So we slip the first stitch as if to purl, slip the second stitch as if to purl, and then we go back into both those stitches and we knit them both together. Very simple. Then we're going to knit to the last 2 stitches. And we're going to knit the last 2 stitches together. Now the reason we do different decreases is because we want our decreases to lean the right way. So this one leans off to the right and this one leans to the left. And if we didn't do that, what would happen is on one side you'd end up with a bit of a zigzag. Not majorly, but it would be noticeable. So row 14, we're just going to purl back. Row 15 to 18, we're going to carry on doing the decreases as we've done them before. So the next row is slip, slip, knit, knit all the stitches to the last 2, knit 2 together. Then we're going to purl a row, then we're going to repeat that again. Slip, slip, knit, knit to the last 2, knit 2 together, and finally purl a row. So I'll see you back here when we've done that. That is our decreases done along the sides, and we are back at 8 stitches, so it's time to do a rapid decrease on the next row. Row 19 starts with a slip, slip, knit, slip, slip, and knit 2 together. And then we are going to knit 2 together 3 times. We have 4 stitches left, and now we just need to cast these off, and we're going to cast them off on a purl row. So a purl cast off, we've done it before. We're just going to purl the first 2 stitches and pass the first stitch over the second stitch. Purl the next stitch and pass the first over the second. Open up that last stitch, trim the end and feed it through the loop and draw to close. And that is our circle for Nemo's eye. Now you're going to need to make another one of these because he needs 2 eyes, and then we need to move on to making the pupils in our midnight yarn, which we'll do next. For the pupils, we're going to start in our midnight yarn and we're going to cast on 2 stitches. So 1 is our slip knot and we just need to cast on 1 more. Our first row, we're going to knit front and back in each stitch and increase our 2 stitches to 4. And we have 4. Row 2, we're just going to purl. Row 3, we're going to increase our 4 stitches to 8 stitches, so it's knit front and back in each stitch. Knit front and back. Knit front and back. Knit front and back. We're at 8 stitches now, and row 4 to 8 are just going to be worked in stocking stitch. So we're going to purl the next row, knit a row, purl a row, knit a row, purl a row. 5 rows. And I'll meet you back here on row 9. That is our 5 rows of stocking stitch done. And now we've just got 3 rows left and we're going to decrease quite rapidly. So the next row, row 9, we're going to slip, slip, knit in the first stitch. So row 9, slip, slip, knit. And then we're going to decrease 2 together 3 times. That takes us to 4 stitches. The next row we're just going to purl. Row 11, our last row, we're going to slip knit and knit 2 together. And because there's only 2 stitches left to cast off, what we can do is just slip that first stitch over the second, open up that loop. It doesn't want to open up. Oh, it will. Snip off our yarn and thread it through the loop and pull tight to secure. And that is the little pupil done. By bringing the eye, you can see that it is much smaller, and we're going to be layering these up when it gets to making up this square. Now we have our background square finished and our 2 eyes and 2 pupils, and we're going to save these and we're going to put them all together in the second part of this, which will be coming up later in this series. What I suggest you do for now is get a lockable stitch marker and thread it through each piece and lock them all together. And now you're going to want to keep this safe with your other squares until we get to part 2 and we're going to construct this square. So I hope you'll join me for that, and I hope you've enjoyed making this. Was this your first time doing seed stitch? It's such a lovely stitch. I hope you'll try it again in another project. Thank you very much for joining me today.